Welcome to Total Retail Talks, your podcast channel for retail knowledge.
Hello, and welcome to episode 77 of Total Retail Talks. I'm Joe Keenan, Executive Editor of Total Retail. Today I'm joined by Chris Meystrik, Chief Technology Officer at Jewelry TV, a television network and online retailer of fine jewelry and loose gemstones. We're going to be discussing how Jewelry TV is leveraging data to give its customers a better shopping experience. Thanks for joining me, Chris.
Happy to be here, Joe. Thanks a bunch.
So let's talk about the types of data that you're collecting about your customers, and then sort of a secondary part to that question is, what are some of the methods around that data collection?
Okay, sure. So we do collect quite a bit of data, and it ranges from data that we may purchase from companies like Experian, just sort of general demographic data, that kind of data you're pulling down off of a SFTP site or something like that, and then loading it into your systems or using it for research, on the side, to viewership data that's also purchased from a company called Rentrack. That's sort of aggregate customer data. We've got your typical OMS data, order management system data that you're collecting as you're placing a first order. That's your standard name and address. Everybody has that. The order details that you gather over time tell a good picture of customers, particularly your repeat customers, rejuvenated customers, people like that. All the payment details, what payment methods are they using? We have our own financing options here. So if they're using that, it tells you one thing. So we comb that data. We've got a lot of good click data too. So the click data is interesting from the website. Obviously, everybody collects it with different methods. We also collect what we call click data, but it's not really click data, from our IVR system. So we know how customers are interacting with our IVR, and that tells us something about how they want to interact with us. We have all the data about what sales channels they use. You're sending emails out. We're collecting, like lots of people, the responses, how fast they respond, what types of emails they respond to, what types of sort of cycle systems that we use that they might be responding to or not responding to. And there's some payment responses that we get that tell you fluency indicators and things like that. You get that type of data from your payment provider. It could be different by different payment providers. We happen to get it in the authorization calls that comes back in that, and we collect that data. And then just your general aggregate customer data that you get, what are all the demographics of the customers we're using, how many of them are new, how many of them are core, how many of them are rejuvenated, and you can go on and on. And so you're obviously collecting that just over time inside of your OMS systems. And
so obviously, the vast data sets that you're collecting, and you're at Jewelry TV is obviously unique to a lot of different retailers, and that television is obviously a big sales channel. Can you speak a little bit about data specific to TV? And I guess are people viewing the television network and then calling into like a call center? How are you collecting data from your television viewers and people that are purchasing off of something they might have seen on the network?
That's right. So you're on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The only day we're not really broadcasting a live show is Christmas Day. So we're in sort of constant real-time mode with our show, and that adds a very interesting dynamic to getting customer data. Now, just like when you're watching TV and you've heard of all the Nielsen ratings and stuff, it's not real easy to get into who's watching you at any one time. But there is a company out there called Rentrack that does this, that collects this type of information from set-top boxes and things like that. So you can know in the aggregate how many people are watching you, and that's really important data to us. But to your point, the customers are watching on TV, in St. Louis, Missouri or something like that, and they're calling into our call center, and that's a good majority of our customers. Call it, say, 70% of our customers are calling into the call center, either talking to a live agent or talking to our IVR system, and that's their choice. But we are, you're typically getting from them. Then in our system, we're also getting like, what channel are you watching? And that's a question that we ask. And so we're recording that kind of information so we know, what affiliate they're watching us on and stuff. So that, in the call center, and then the website, of course, you've got some anytime customers, people that are finding you through Google that are just jewelry shoppers, and they're coming less influenced by the actual TV channel. But an awful lot of our customers are very influenced by our television channel. And it adds a dimension that most retailers just don't have. I mean, it's this live whatever you're showing on the air is your hot item right then and there, and you've got to be ready for it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic that inventory probably alone concerns, and the way you, like you said, a product that's on the air at that point is probably spiking in sales and kind of managing. Yeah,
exactly right. Yep.
So then, with all this vast amount of data and this massive amount that you're capturing about your customers, there's got to be some challenges with kind of then maintaining that data and making use of it. And can you talk about what you're doing within the organization to manage your data?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and there are challenges. I think there's always challenges. We have a very entrepreneurial spirit here at JTV. Our founders are that way. Our CEO is that way. Our culture from the executives, the executive staff that I sit on down is, very entrepreneurial spirit. Now that does drive some challenges, though. You want to be ad hoc. You want to be as agile as possible. But when you're just getting ad hoc data and and flinging it around on drives and and generating ad hoc reports, and on demand, maybe even that to me, that's a challenge. We like to allow that kind of thing to happen, but it doesn't really give you a cost-effective, high-value data set at that point. You get some value out of it. I'm not trying to sort of denounce the value at all, but the real challenge is, how do you go from that mode, for example, to putting the data, formalizing how you get the data, formalizing where you put the data, and then making sure the data is available to the people that need it when they need it. Like, I'm not a big fan. I mean, not that I'm an anti-fan of reports, but I'm a huge fan of using your warehouse data, your even big data elements, whatever they are, pushing it down into your enterprise systems where the people are actually making the decisions. That's when you get huge value and lower cost for pulling that kind of data in. You can start to, if it's in a data warehouse, you can start to cross-correlate it through relationships in the data that you couldn't have done when it was just sitting on the drive. So our big challenge at JTV is going from that first step, which we encourage, to the formalization step. I think we've gotten pretty good at it, but there is a time lag there. It doesn't happen instantly, and maybe you don't want it to happen instantly. You do want to prove that you have good data that you can actually make use of in the business before you spend a bunch of time formalizing it. But that I think is our biggest challenge, is just formalizing it. And we've seen the world in the past. I've been with JTV now for going on 13 years. And when I first got here, our reporting systems, they were atrocious, and it was just horrible. You had to request reports. The data wasn't really flowing anywhere. And you just got to get away from that, and so we've grown and learned from very serious challenges. So
let's talk about the next step then in that process. You speak about managing what you have in your data warehouse and your CRM system, and then getting that to the right people within the organization. Obviously, then the next step is, okay, how do we take action on this data and kind of use it to our advantage to give our customers the best experience with JTV possible. So can you talk maybe about, what you're doing around that, around making data actionable, maybe an example or two, and it can be anything from using it as a customer acquisition outreach tool to kind of post-purchase customer support. What are your thoughts around that, Chris?
So, yeah, the use of the customer data, like you said, I mean, that's where we're getting the high value out of it. But an example, and probably the easiest example, is you've got this data sitting around in a data warehouse, and it's just ripe for marketing. Making sure you're getting a message out to the customers in a fairly specific manner, in a manner that clearly, of course, helps JTV, but is informing your customers that want to buy from you. And there's a lot of customers that want to buy from JTV. We have a huge customer base, so making sure they know what's the next trend that maybe they ought to be looking out for in the jewelry side of the business, or maybe we've got a new supply of tanzanite stones that are really deep purple or something, and the gem collectors want to come and start looking at those. You want to make sure you're targeting those customers and getting the right message out, because a collector is very different than a fashion jewelry wearer, for example. They're just two different people. So that's easy, low-hanging fruit to me, using customer data that we've collected to do upsells and cross-sells and sort of ensemble-y kind of things. So when a customer's on the phone, they maybe bought the necklace, but they want the pendant or the earrings that go with that necklace. And we're using that customer data to go back and look at their past purchases and properly recommend. So it's not just a customers who looked at this also might want this. It's you also purchased in the past these kinds of things, and you actually might want the earrings with that. And there's a bunch of tabs at the bottom of our call center system that allow our agents to properly upsell that customer, and we're showing that agent, who they're on the phone with, right then and there. So, that's pretty powerful upselling techniques that is actually very advantageous to the customers because, when she calls us and she falls in love with that necklace, but then knows she's walked away with a matching set of earrings, there's a lot of happiness there, and that's, we're all sort of all about, getting the customer what she wants. We use it to populate, we use our customer data to populate a customer life cycle. And there's a life cycle as people roll through JTV, they're at different stages. And that actually helps us, sort of to figure out, hey, what life cycle state are they in? They may be a really high value customer at this point in time. And so they want a particular type of service when they're on the phone. Maybe it's more concierge type service. And people feel that, and if we know that's who that customer is, then we want to show that to them on the phone. It's harder to do that on the website and give some special service. But how we provide customers with certain financing opportunities, for example, making sure that they're aware of them using the customer data, that's pretty important. And I think some of the work we're doing that we haven't quite released to production yet, but we're very close, and it's real important to JTV, is an internal project called Kauai, which is Hawaiian for river or stream. And we're in partnership with Informatica for this project, but it's taking near real-time streaming data off of all of the various sales channels and literally driving that down into the cockpit that the show hosts are viewing and telling them about trends that the customers are actually interacting with right now. That is to me the sort of the grand poobah of data, if I can take a Flintstones, analogy there. But that's really hitting home. Now, what are they searching for? What type of stuff are they searching for? Because the beauty that we have that most retailers don't is we can actually change what the next product is that's about to come up on air. How do you do that as a brick and mortar? You just go in and change your store. You can't do that. We're changing our store minute to minute. And we want the right information in the producers and the show hosts' hands to know, hey, this product that I'm currently showing isn't trending very well right now. Or maybe the sales aren't coming in for the product now, but it is actually trending well and she should stay on it and she's going to get the sales later. That's really important because you might have customers sitting there trying to get intrigued about the product and they just need a little more, and so it is a very customer-centric type of way to use data.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As kind of that real-time aspect to it that you mentioned that's so different than a traditional brick-and-mortar retailer is faced with. So how about managing the process of sharing data within your organization? So, that the marketing team has access to the same data that customer service does, that merchandising does, that your fulfillment teams and inventory management teams have. Can you talk about kind of that shared angle around making sure data is accessible to all?
The data at JTV is managed across just two departments. And those two departments, one of them reports into technology, which is what I'm the head of. And that's our enterprise data infrastructure group. And they're responsible for the very formalized notion of getting data out to the business. And then we have sort of a business intelligence group, and they do more of the sort of data scientist researchy type stuff, and it's less formal. Now they use the formal data, but they might be, stirring in some informal data, and that's really the only two places where we pull data into the organization. And these two groups are sort of tightly coupled. We kind of understand how to move data amongst one another. Again, the challenge is getting the informal data formalized. But once it's formalized, it's very difficult to share that data when it's not formalized, right? So that's more of an ad hoc, very manual process. You have to go ask for it. You have to make sure maybe you're in the right meeting and you know that it exists, that kind of stuff. And those are just natural challenges that I think that everybody has. But once it gets formalized, we're not a lot about data hoarding. Like we want one version of the truth out there to everybody, and everybody's looking at the same data. And the only sort of caveat to that whole thing would be what kind of security and proper controls do we have to put around particularly sensitive data? Other than that, people they have permissions and they all have access to the data. I mean, if somebody in marketing wants to see affiliates data, which is the data about, how we're operating with certain cable providers. Now there's certain sensitive data there they can't see, but they could see, how we're trending if they need that for some reason, no problem.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So then my final question, Chris, is just, you've talked a lot about how you're handling this at Jewelry Television, but what advice might you have for other retailers that are looking to leverage data to better meet their customer needs?
I think my advice, and learned over a 25-year career of making a lot of mistakes, and a fairly long career here, is we talked about it a little bit earlier, but one, don't be afraid of the entrepreneurial spirit of getting data. Don't feel like the minute I get it, I've got to go formalize it. You could be wasting your time, right? So I am a big fan of that spirit of pulling stuff in. Let's see if there's value here, and if there's no value, fine. I mean, just move on. But never lose sight of the fact that you have to formalize it at some point. If you don't formalize the data, then you don't get the efficiencies in pulling the data in, so you still have people manually doing all that work when they could be doing something else, and you're not getting it out to the masses. And in particular, if you don't formalize it, you're really not getting it down into your enterprise systems, because let's face it, enterprise systems are a formal thing. Transaction systems behave as they're supposed to behave. We build them in an agile manner, but once they're out there, man, they're running a business, and you want that formal process to push that data down. Our show planning tools that we write here at JTV have, regression data that's formalized inside of our data warehouse and pushed down to it in near real time, so that as they're planning shows, they understand, what is the forecast of this show as I'm putting product in and adding a show host to it and putting it in a time slot, and that regression algorithm's running. I mean, that's exciting stuff, and so you want to get to that spot in my mind, and just, this doesn't supplant the need for post-mortem analytics or forecasting analytics or anything like that. It just supplements it, and it makes the business better and more agile. So I guess, to sum that up, it's be entrepreneurial about your data. Once you're that way and you've proven it's good, formalize it, and then get it out to people. In particular, get it out to people where they're making their decisions, not in some report. I mean, those are nice, and if that's all you got, fine, do it. But if you can put it in the tool that they're using right where they're making that decision, that's it.
Yeah, that's some really sound advice for our listeners. So I want to take this opportunity to thank Chris Meystrik of Jewelry Television TV for his time. Please check out our podcast channel page, mytotalretail.com/podcasts, for show notes. Total Retail Talks is available on iTunes and Stitcher, but make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. Lastly, please follow us on Twitter at MyTotalRetail or on Facebook at facebook.com/MyTotalRetail. Thanks, and I look forward to you joining us in the next episode of Total Retail Talks.